The proposition, the rain pelted against the windows of Nora Fleming's tiny studio apartment, matching the rhythm of her growing despair. Another rejection letter lay crumpled on her desk, alongside the stack of unpaid bills that seemed to multiply by the day. At 28, she had imagined her artwork would have gained recognition by now. But reality had other plans. The phone rang, pulling her away from the canvas she'd been staring at for hours. "Miss Fleming, this is St. Andrew's Hospital calling about your father." Her heart sank. "Is he all right?" "He's stable, but Dr. Patterson recommends a specialized treatment. I'm calling to discuss payment options." Nora closed her eyes. How much? When the hospital administrator quoted the amount, she nearly dropped the phone. That kind of money might as well have been £1 million. I'll figure something out, she promised, though she had no idea how. After hanging up, Nora grabbed her raincoat. She needed air, needed to think. The gallery downtown was hosting an exhibition. Perhaps she could network, find someone interested in commissioning a piece. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all she had left. The Somerset Gallery buzzed with London's elite, their laughter mingling with the soft classical music. Nora felt painfully out of place in her second-hand dress, but she straightened her shoulders and entered anyway. She was studying a particularly pretentious modern piece when a deep voice beside her said, "Dreadful, isn't it? Like someone spilled paint and called it art." Nora turned to find herself face to face with a tall, impeccably dressed man. His dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, with sharp cheekbones and penetrating gray eyes. "Actually," she replied, unable to stop herself, "I think it's expressing the chaos of modern existence, though perhaps with a bit too much blue." The man raised an eyebrow, surprised by her "Most people just agree with me." "Then you must be someone important," she said with a slight smile. "Julian Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Duke of Westmoreland." Nora felt her cheeks flush. A duke, of course. Nora Fleming, artist or trying to be. Anyway, something in Julian's expression changed as he studied her face. "You're different," he said, almost to himself. Before she could respond, a photographer approached, asking for a picture of the Duke. Julian politely declined and steered Nora toward a quieter corner of the gallery. "You didn't ask for a selfie or try to impress me with connections," he noted. Nora shrugged. "Should I have?" Julian laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. "Refreshing. Everyone wants something from my money, my title, my influence." "Well, I don't even know you," Nora pointed out. Their conversation flowed easily as they moved through the gallery. Julian seemed fascinated by her honest opinions on the artwork, while Nora found herself intrigued by glimpses of the man behind the aristocratic facade. When her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital, reality came crashing back. Nora excused herself, stepping outside to read the update on her father's condition. Julian found her there, staring blankly at the rain. "Is everything all right?" Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice, or maybe just the weight of her worries. But Nora found herself confiding in him about her father's illness and the impossible medical bills. Julian was silent for a long moment. Then, "I might have a solution, a mutually beneficial arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Nora asked warily. "My grandmother is dying. She controls my inheritance and insists I must be engaged before her passing to receive it. I've avoided marriage, but now I'm facing financial ruin. My estate employs hundreds. I can't let them down." Nora stared at him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Become my fiancé temporarily, just until my grandmother passes or changes her will. In return, I'll cover your father's medical expenses. All of them. You want me to pretend to be in love with you for money?" Julian's expression remained impassive. 3 months, at most. We attend some events, convince my family, then part ways amicably. Why me? You could have anyone. Because you don't seem to care who I am or what I have. You'd be convincing. His eyes met hers. "I need someone real." Nora. The proposition hung between them like a physical thing. Nora thought of her father in that hospital bed, of the treatments that could save him. "When would we start?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow. I'll send a car." Julian handed her his card. "Think about it." As he walked away, Nora stared at the embossed card in her hand. A deal with a duke. A chance to save her father. What choice did she really have? Worlds collide. The sleek black Bentley pulled up to Nora's apartment building the next morning, looking comically out of place among the weathered brick and graffiti-tagged walls. She descended the steps, clutching a small suitcase, feeling as though she were stepping into a dream or perhaps a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Julian's driver, a stoic older gentleman named Harrison, opened the door for her with a slight bow. "Miss Fleming, His Grace is waiting at Blackwood House." The drive through London revealed a gradual transformation of neighborhoods, from Nora's struggling artistic district to the elegant townhouses of Mayfair. When they finally arrived at Blackwood House, Nora's confidence wavered at the sight of the imposing Georgian mansion. "Remember our agreement," Julian said as he greeted her in the marble-floored foyer. He looked even more aristocratic today in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent. "We met at the gallery, fell madly in love, and now we're engaged. My grandmother arrives tomorrow." "I still can't believe I'm doing this," Nora murmured. gazing up at the ancestral portraits lining the grand staircase. Second thoughts. Julian raised an eyebrow. No. She thought of her father and steeled herself. But I'm an artist, not an actress. Just be yourself, accept in love with me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Winters will help you settle in. The housekeeper appeared as if summoned, a slender woman with kind eyes that contradicted her formal demeanor. She led Nora to a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment. The Duchess's chambers, Mrs. Winters explained, or they will be, when you're married. Nora ran her fingers over the silk bedspread. This is all temporary. Mrs. Winters' expression remained neutral. Of course, Miss Fleming. That evening, a small army descended upon Nora: a stylist, a makeup artist, and a personal shopper with racks of designer clothes. Julian had arranged a complete transformation, explaining that his grandmother would expect nothing less from his chosen bride. I don't recognize myself, Nora said later, staring at her reflection in an emerald gown that hugged curves she didn't know she possessed. That's rather the point, Julian replied, entering the room. He stopped abruptly when he saw her, something flashing in his eyes before his composure returned. You look ... appropriate. High praise indeed, Nora said dryly. Their first test came that night at a charity gala. Julian's world opened before her, a glittering to a landscape of wealth and privilege where last names were pedigrees and casual conversations carried political weight. Darling, you remember Lord and Lady Pembroke, Julian said, guiding her with a hand at the small of her back. Of course, Nora lied smoothly, offering her hand. Lovely to see you again. Lady Pembroke's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't recall Julian mentioning you before. How did you meet? At the Somerset Gallery, Nora replied truthfully. Julian hated a painting I rather liked. We argued about it, and somehow ended up having dinner. Julian looked surprised at her candor, but Lady Pembroke laughed. That sounds like our Julian. Always the contrarian. As they moved through the crowd, Julian whispered, well done, though perhaps less detail next time. People remember details, Nora countered. They make lies believable. Throughout the evening, Nora found herself the subject of intense scrutiny. Women assessed her gown, her jewelry, her manner of speech. Men evaluated her connections, her family background fabricated by Julian, her suitability as a duchess. During dinner, she was seated beside an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Julian's godfather. So, you're the woman who finally captured our Julian, he said, studying her over his wineglass. I must say you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Nora asked. Oh, someone like the others. Beautiful but vapid. Ambitious. Calculating. He leaned closer. Julian's title attracts a certain type, you understand. Nora glanced across the table where Julian was engaged in conversation with a statuesque blonde. I can imagine. Yet here you are, an artist with no fortune or connections. His eyes twinkled. Fascinating. When Julian reclaimed her for the first dance, he pulled her close enough for propriety but maintained a careful distance. My godfather seemed taken with you. He thinks I'm an anomaly, Nora said, following his lead across the floor. A commoner who's somehow ensnared a duke. Isn't that precisely what you're pretending to be? Yes, but I'm not pretending to be in love with your title or your money. Julian's step faltered slightly. What are you pretending to love about me then? Nora hadn't expected the question. She looked up at him, really looked at the face she was supposed to adore. I would love your passion, she said finally. The way you care about your estate and the people who depend on you. How you value honesty even when it challenges you. The person behind the duke. Something unreadable crossed Julian's face. You've been paying attention. I'm an artist, I observe. Later, as they returned to Blackwood House, Julian seemed troubled. In the dim light of the car, his profile was sharp against the passing streetlights. Is something wrong? Nora asked. You charmed everyone tonight, he said. Even people who've known me for decades believed you could love me. Isn't that what you wanted? Yes. But he shook his head. My grandmother is far more perceptive. She'll be watching your every move, listening to every word. I'll be careful. Be prepared. She'll try to prove you're after my money. Nora laughed softly. Technically I am, for your father, Julian reminded her. That's different. At Blackwood House, Julian escorted her to her room, pausing at the door. Tomorrow will be challenging. My grandmother is ... formidable. I'm not afraid of her, Nora said. Perhaps you should be. His voice softened unexpectedly. Get some rest, Nora. Left alone, Nora stood at the window overlooking the moonlit garden. In less than 24 hours, her life had transformed completely. She had stepped into Julian's world, a world of privilege and power, but also of scrutiny and suspicion. Tomorrow would bring the greatest test of their charade. The Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland would arrive, and with her, the judgment that could secure Julian's inheritance and her father's future. As Nora turned from the window, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, elegant, polished, almost unrecognizable. She wondered, with sudden unease, if she might lose herself in this performance. And worse, if a part of her might not want to find her way back. Unexpected feelings. The Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland arrived precisely at 11 the next morning, heralded not by fanfare but by the sudden straightening of every servant's spine. Beatrice Blackwood entered Blackwood House like a general inspecting troops, her silver hair arranged in an immaculate coif, her posture defying her 82 years. Julian, she acknowledged her grandson with a perfunctory kiss on each cheek before turning her piercing blue eyes to Nora. And this is the woman who has supposedly captured my grandson's heart. Nora offered her hand. Nora Fleming, Your Grace, it's a pleasure to meet you. The older woman's grip was surprisingly strong. We shall see about that. Julian placed a protective hand at the small of Nora's back. Grandmother, Nora is my fiancée. I expect you to treat her with respect. Respect is earned, not demanded, Beatrice replied, handing her gloves to a waiting maid. Even by Duchess's tea was served in the morning room, a sunlit space overlooking the garden. Nora felt the weight of Beatrice's scrutiny with every movement, how she stirred her tea, how she sat, how she responded to the careful probing about her background. An artist, Beatrice said, the word hanging between them like an accusation. How, bohemian. I find beauty in unexpected places, Nora replied evenly. And what unexpected beauty did you find in my grandson, besides the obvious advantages of his title and fortune? Julian tensed beside her, but Nora laid a gentle hand on his arm. Actually, what first drew me to Julian was his honesty. At the gallery, he said exactly what he thought, regardless of what others expected to hear. She smiled at him. It's rare to find someone who values truth over politeness. Something flickered in Julian's eye, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Honesty, Beatrice repeated skeptically, not a quality our family is particularly known for. Then perhaps Julian is changing what it means to be a Blackwood. The older woman's eyes narrowed. Charming, but I wonder if your affection would remain so steadfast without the trappings of wealth. Julian, perhaps Miss Fleming would enjoy seeing Thornfield Manor. Julian stiffened. Grandmother, excellent idea, Beatrice continued. We'll all go tomorrow. Later, Julian found Nora in the library, browsing the shelves of leather-bound volumes. I apologize for my grandmother, he said. She's determined to prove you're a fortune hunter. What's Thornfield Manor? Nora asked. Julian sighed, dropping into an armchair. Our country estate. It's been in the family for centuries, but it's in disrepair. Most of the rooms are closed off, the grounds are overgrown, and the roof leaks in a dozen places. That's why you need your inheritance. Yes, without it, I'll have to sell Thornfield. Dozens of families in the village depend on the estate for their livelihoods. He ran a hand through his hair. My grandmother is taking you there to see if you'll recoil at the reality of a cash-poor aristocrat. Nora sat across from him. I grew up in a flat where we used buckets to catch the rain. I'm not afraid of a leaky roof. For the first time since she'd met him, Julian smiled, genuinely a warm expression that transformed his face. No, I don't suppose you are. The next day they drove through the winding country roads of Sussex. Beatrice sat regally in the back of the Bentley, while Julian pointed out landmarks to Nora. When they crested a hill and Thornfield Manor came into view, Nora caught her breath. Despite its obvious state of neglect, the Elizabethan manor house was magnificent, sprawling structure of golden stone with mullioned windows and ivy-covered walls. Beyond it stretched rolling hills, an overgrown formal garden, and the glint of a lake in the distance. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's a money pit, Beatrice corrected. Drafty in winter, sweltering in summer, and consuming funds like a ravenous beast. But worth saving, Julian said quietly. They spent the day touring the estate. Julian showed Nora the portraits of ancestors, the grand ballroom with its dusty chandeliers, and the library with books dating back centuries. He introduced her to the staff, who remained a skeletal crew maintaining what they could with limited resources. When they reached the village, Nora was surprised to find Julian greeted warmly by everyone they met. He knew their names, asked after their children, listened to their concerns. Here, away from London society, he seemed like a different person, more relaxed, more genuine. The Duke looks happier than we've seen him in years, Mrs. Porter, the village shopkeeper, told Nora while Julian discussed farm yields with the tenant. And I suspect that's you're doing, miss. We haven't known each other very long, Nora demurred. The older woman smiled. Some things don't need time, they just need the right person. That evening, while Beatrice retired early with complaints about country air, Julian took Nora to the rose garden, once his mother's pride, now struggling beneath weeds and neglect. Even like this, you can see what it was, he said, touching a wild rose that bloomed defiantly among the chaos. What it could be again. You really love this place, Nora observed. It's more than stone and land. It's history, continuity. He looked at her. You understand that, don't you? As an artist, I understand loving something beyond reason, she admitted. My art is like that for me. In the fading light, Julian's face softened. Show me your work sometime. Your real work, not what you think will sell. Why? Because I want to see how you see the world. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Julian stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. We don't have an audience here, Nora reminded him softly. You don't have to pretend. What if I'm not pretending? He asked, his voice barely audible. Before she could respond, a voice called from the terrace. Julian, Lady Victoria has arrived. A tall, elegantly dressed woman emerged from the house, her blonde hair catching the last rays of sunlight. "Victoria," Julian said, stepping back from Nora. "I didn't know you were coming." "Surprise," Victoria trilled, kissing his cheek before turning cool eyes to Nora. "And this must be the fiancé everyone's talking about." "Nora Fleming," Julian said. "Lady Victoria Harrington, an old ... friend." The way Victoria's hand lingered on Julian's arm suggested something more than friendship. "Beatrice invited me for dinner." She thought Julian might appreciate some familiar company. Over dinner, Victoria recounted stories of her shared history with Julian, childhood summers, society events, private jokes. With each tale, Nora felt herself fading into the background, an outsider to the world these people had always shared. "Remember when we were 17, Julian?" Victoria laughed. "When we snuck away from the Pembrokes ball and went swimming in the lake. We were foolish children," Julian replied, his eyes darting to Nora. "Were we?" Victoria's smile was knowing. "Sometimes I think those were our truest moments." Later, Nora stood alone on the terrace, watching stars emerge above the ancient trees. The sound of footsteps made her turn. "Don't let Victoria bother you," Julian said, joining her. "She and my grandmother have been plotting my matrimonial fate since we were in nursery." "She loves you," Nora observed. "She loves the idea of being a duchess, and you've never returned her feelings." Julian was silent for a moment. "There was a time when I thought she was what I wanted, someone who understood my world, my responsibilities. It seemed ... convenient." "Love shouldn't be convenient," Nora said. "No," Julian agreed, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. "I'm beginning to understand that." That night, lying in a four-poster bed that had sheltered Blackwoods for generations, Nora faced an uncomfortable truth. The lines between pretense and reality were blurring. When Julian looked at her, when he spoke of his dreams for Thornfield, when his hand brushed hers, those moments felt real. And more dangerous still, she wanted them to be. 3 floors below, in the study, Beatrice Blackwood sat across from Victoria, their faces illuminated by firelight. "The girl is becoming a problem," Beatrice said. "Julian actually seems attached to her." Victoria swirled brandy in a crystal glass. "What do you suggest?" The older woman's smile was thin. "Every charade has its breaking point. We simply need to find theirs." Betrayal and truth. The following week unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Nora and Julian returned to London, where they attended charity galas, opera performances, and private dinners, always under Beatrice's watchful eye. To Nora's surprise, Julian insisted she bring her paints and canvases to Blackwood House. "The light in the conservatory is excellent," he said, showing her the glass-enclosed space filled with exotic plants. "My mother used to paint here." Painting became Nora's sanctuary amid the performance of their engagement. In those quiet hours, with brush in hand, she could be herself again, not the polished or astute, but the artist who saw beauty in imperfection. One afternoon, Julian found her there, absorbed in a canvas depicting Thornfield's wild rose garden. "You've captured it perfectly," he said, studying the painting. "The beauty in the wilderness." "I paint what moves me," Nora replied, not looking up. Julian touched a dried smear of blue paint on her sleeve. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? Just us, away from my grandmother and society. Isn't that part of our arrangement? This isn't for show. No audience, no pretending." His eyes met hers. "Just dinner, Nora." They dined at a small restaurant in Covent Garden, the kind of place no one would expect to find a duke. Julian wore jeans and a simple shirt, looking more relaxed than Nora had ever seen him. "No one knows me here," he explained. "I can just be Julian." Over pasta and wine, they talked about everything except their arrangement, art, literature, their childhoods, their dreams. Julian spoke of his hopes for restoring Thornfield, while Nora shared her ambition to open a community art studio for underprivileged children. "You see possibilities where others see problems," Julian said, watching her with a warmth that made her heart race. Later, walking along the Thames, their hands brushed and then, almost naturally, their fingers intertwined. "This is dangerous," Nora murmured. Julian stopped, turning to face her. "What if I don't care?" "You should. This was supposed to be temporary, a business arrangement. And if I want more," his voice was low, intense, "if I want this to be real." Before she could answer, he kissed her, not for show, not for anyone watching, but with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they broke apart, Nora saw vulnerability in his eyes that the proud Duke rarely revealed. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he admitted, "and it terrifies me." The confession hung between them, beautiful and frightening in its honesty. "Julian," Nora began, but was interrupted by his phone ringing. The call was from the hospital. Nora's father had taken a turn for the worse. They rushed to St. Andrews, where Nora found her father pale and fragile beneath the hospital sheets. Dr. Patterson explained that he'd suffered a setback but was responding to treatment. Julian stayed by her side through the night, his hand steady on her shoulder as she kept vigil. When morning came, he brought coffee and pastries, then sat beside her father's bed while she freshened up. When she returned, she overheard her father asking, "Do you love my daughter?" Julian's answer was without hesitation, "Yes, sir, more than I thought possible." "Then treat her heart with care. It's the most precious thing I have. Nora slipped away before they saw her, her own heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to happen, this real, terrifying, wonderful feeling growing between them. A week later, Beatrice announced a formal engagement ball at Blackwood House to introduce Nora properly to society, she claimed, though her smile never reached her eyes. The night of the ball, Nora wore a gown of midnight blue that Julian had chosen for her. When she descended the grand staircase, his expression made every head turn to see what had captured the Duke's attention so completely. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, taking her hand. The ballroom of Blackwood House glittered with crystal and candlelight. 300 of London's elite had come to witness the engagement of the Duke of Westmoreland and to assess his choice of bride. "Quite the fairy tale," Victoria commented, appearing beside them in a striking red gown, the commoner who captured the Duke's heart. "Lady Victoria," Julian acknowledged stiffly. "I've been so intrigued by your whirlwind romance," she continued, her smile sharp, especially since Julian had always been so cautious about commitment. Before either could respond, Beatrice called for attention. The Dowager Duchess stood at the center of the room, commanding even in her advanced age. "Tonight, we celebrate not only an engagement, but the future of the Blackwood legacy," she announced. "Julian has chosen a bride, and while Miss Fleming is unconventional, perhaps that is what our family needs." Polite applause followed. Julian squeezed Nora's hand reassuringly. "However," Beatrice continued, "a duchess must be beyond reproach. Her character must be unimpeachable, her motives pure." She turned cold eyes to Nora. "Would you agree, Miss Fleming?" "Of course, Your Grace," Nora replied, a sense of dread growing within her. "Then perhaps you would explain this." Beatrice gestured to a servant, who wheeled in a covered easel. With a dramatic flourish, she unveiled a canvas, Nora's canvassy one she'd been working on privately for weeks, but it wasn't her painting of Thornfield. It was a detailed portrait of Julian, captured in a moment of unguarded vulnerability as he stood in the rose garden. The intimacy of the portrait was unmistakable. This was not the work of someone pretending to love, but of someone who saw into the very soul of their subject. "A lovely piece," Beatrice said, "found in Miss Fleming's studio." Along with this, she held up a document, the contract Julian and Nora had signed, outlining the terms of their arrangement, including the payment for her father's medical care. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Julian stepped forward, his face pale with anger. "Grandmother, that's enough." "No, Julian. These people deserve to know the truth. Your fiancée is nothing but a paid actress. This engagement is a fraud." Nora stood frozen as hundreds of eyes turned to her with disgust and mockery. She looked to Julian, desperately hoping he would deny it all, would choose her over his pride and position. Instead, he said nothing, his face a mask of aristocratic control. The silence was her answer. "Excuse me," Nora whispered, and fled the ballroom. She was packing her things when Julian finally came to her room. "Nora, please don't," she said, not turning to face him. "You made your choice downstairs." "I was shocked. She had no right to expose you like that." "That's what you're worried about. The exposure, not that I'm leaving." She spun to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I fell in love with you, Julian. Real love, not pretend. And for a moment I thought maybe you felt it too." "I do," he insisted, reaching for her. Nora stepped back. "No, a man who loves a woman doesn't stand silent when she's humiliated. He doesn't care what society thinks. He chooses her, every time. It's complicated. It's actually very simple. You care more about your inheritance, your position, and what people think than you do about me." She closed her suitcase with finality. "I release you from our contract. You don't owe me anything." "What about your father?" "I'll figure something out. I always have." As she moved toward the door, Julian blocked her path. "Nora, please. I need time to fix this." "There's nothing to fix. We played our parts, but the show is over." She met his eyes one last time. "Goodbye, Julian." She left Blackwood House in a taxi, not the Bentley, refusing Julian's insistence on having Harrison drive her. As London's lights blurred through her tears, she wondered how a pretend romance had left her with very real heartbreak. A real beginning. 3 months passed. Nora's father improved slowly with alternative treatments she cobbled together through medical charities and community fundraising. She threw herself into her art, channeling her pain into canvases that, for the first time, caught the attention of serious collectors. A small gallery in Camden agreed to show her work, focusing on her series Aristocratic Illusions, paintings that captured the beauty and emptiness of wealth. The centerpiece was a canvas she'd nearly destroyed a dozen times. Julian standing alone in Thornfield's great hall, surrounded by grandeur but utterly isolated. On opening night, Nora stood nervously as London's art critics and collectors examined her work. Mrs. Winters, who had kept in touch despite everything, had promised to attend. "Your technique has matured tremendously," commented one critic, studying a painting of crystal champagne flutes with hairline fractures. "There's real emotional depth here." "Thank you," Nora replied, still amazed that people were taking her seriously at last. "The artist reveals herself through her subjects," another visitor observed, stopping before Julian's portrait. "You must have known him well." Before Nora could respond, a familiar voice said, "Not as well as he wished." Julian stood in the gallery entrance, dressed simply in dark jeans and a sweater. He looked different thinner, his hair longer, a shadow of beard on his jaw. "What are you doing here?" Nora asked when they were momentarily alone. "Mrs. Winters told me about your exhibition." His eyes moved over her face as if memorizing it. "You look well." "I am well," she said, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. "My father's health is improving, and my work is finally being recognized. I've been following your progress. The Times review was excellent." "You read the Times art section now?" "I read anything that mentions you." A waiter passed with champagne, and Julian took 2 glasses, offering one to Nora. "To your success." She accepted the toast cautiously. "Thank you for coming, but if you'll excuse me, I should speak with other guests." Julian caught her arm gently. "Nora, please, 5 minutes. That's all I ask." Something in his eyes of vulnerability she'd never seen before made her nod. 5 minutes. They stepped outside to the small garden behind the gallery, where fairy lights twinkled in the trees. "I sold Blackwood House," Julian said without preamble. Why it was never home, just a symbol of what the Blackwoods was supposed to be. He took a breath. "I've been living at Thornfield overseeing the renovations, but your grandmother changed her will again after the ball. Cut me off completely." He shrugged. "It was liberating, actually. For the first time in my life, I had to decide what really mattered to me, and what was that? Thornfield, the people who depend on it, my own conscience." He met her eyes. "You." Nora looked away. "Julian, I was a coward that night," he admitted. "I'd spent my entire life trying to be worthy of my title, my family name. When my grandmother exposed our arrangement, I froze caught between the man I was raised to be and the man I wanted to be. And which man are you now? I hope I'm becoming someone better." He gestured to the gallery. "Someone who might be worthy of the woman who painted those canvases, who sees truth and captures it without flinching." Despite herself, Nora felt the wall around her heart beginning to crack. "How are you funding the renovations without your inheritance?" Julian smiled ruefully. "I've discovered I have other talents besides being a duke. I've been working with a historical preservation trust, consulting on other estates, and I've sold some things out: cars, investments." "You're working?" Nora couldn't hide her surprise. "Don't sound so shocked. I'm quite good at it." His expression grew serious. "But I'm not here to talk about Thornfield or my grandmother or even my newfound career." "Then why are you here?" "Because 3 months ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let you walk away." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Nora. Not for what you can pretend to be, but for who you are. The woman who challenged me, who saw me, who painted me as I truly am." "Julian, let me finish. I'm not offering you a title anymore. I can't promise wealth or status, but I can promise you honesty, partnership, and a love that isn't pretend." His voice broke slightly. "If you'll have me." Nora looked into his eyes, the same eyes she'd painted from memory 100 times. "How do I know this isn't just another arrangement? Another role you're playing?" In answer, Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn sketchbook. "This was my mother's, the last thing she gave me before she died." He opened it carefully to reveal delicate watercolors of Thornfield through the seasons. "Art was her truth, just like it's yours. She told me to find someone who would see beauty in the things I love." He turned to the final page, where a pressed wild rose lay beside a small, simple ring, not a diamond, but a pearl in an antique setting. This was her engagement ring. Before my father replaced it with the Blackwood diamonds, she said it was the only jewelry that ever mattered, because it came with real love. Julian held out the ring. "I'm not asking you to be a duchess. I'm asking if you might consider being my wife, my partner, my reality, not my pretense." For a long moment, Nora looked at the ring, then at Julian, the proud duke who had humbled himself for love. "I fell in love with you between the lies," she said softly. "When you showed me Thornfield, when you sat with my father, when you looked at my art and really saw me." She took a deep breath. "But I need to know this is real." "Come to Thornfield," Julian suggested. "Not as my fiancée or my duchess, but as Nora Fleming, the artist. See what I'm trying to build there. Help me make it beautiful again." His eyes held hers. "No contracts, no pretending. Just us, discovering if what we felt was real." The gallery door opened, spilling light and conversation into the garden. Nora's agent called her name, reminding her that collectors were waiting. "I should go back inside," she said. Julian nodded, carefully closing the sketchbook. "Of course." As he turned to leave, Nora caught his hand. "The rose garden," she said, "at Thornfield. Has it been restored yet?" "No." A smile tugged at his lips. "I was hoping to find someone who could see its potential. Someone with an artist's eye." Nora felt something settle in her heart, not the fairy tale ending of a commoner becoming duchess, but something truer and more valuable. A beginning, built on honesty. "I'd like to see it," she said. "This weekend, perhaps." The hope that bloomed in Julian's eyes was worth more than all the Blackwood diamonds. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture not of aristocratic custom but of simple devotion. "I'll be waiting," he promised. Inside the gallery, her paintings hung like windows into a world of pretense and privilege she had briefly inhabited. But outside, in a garden lit by stars, Nora Fleming had found something neither art nor artifice could create her. Love that had begun as illusion but grown into truth, and that was a masterpiece worth creating.